Hello, Mr. Ankit Gurji. Can you able to hear me?
Video sharing issue with my other desktop. Otherwise,
Okay.
extremely.
Okay.
Yeah. So, should I start, or wait for some time?
Okay, I think we should wait for like 2 more minutes.
No problem. No problem. Perfectly fine. I'll just let me just check if I can share the things.
Yeah.
Moment.
Yes, Mr. Angiji, can you able to share now?
Says grant permission in system settings. Accessibility. Success. Okay.
Mr. Angiji, we have already made you the presenter. Yeah, you
Okay.
can-
Okay. Yeah. So, fine. So when I go to share, it is asking me to give permission in the system settings, and there location services. Everybody, just give me one moment. I'm sorry for the delay, but so Tenzila, I'll just for one moment log out and then log in again.
Sure.
Just 1 minute. Yeah.
Sorry for the inconvenience caused. I request everyone to kindly stay for 1 or 2 more minutes. The speaker will join very soon. I request everyone to kindly to stay for 1 or 2 more minutes. Our speakers for tonight's program is rejoining the session again. Sorry for the inconvenience caused. Thank you.
I think it's better you can share it, and I don't want to waste any more time. So meanwhile, you receive those files, and I'll start my sharing here. So I'm just sending you the files.
Okay.
Um, yeah. So shall I reply to the message where the
Uh, yeah, sure.
or you can tell me the email ID where you can receive it directly.
Okay, yeah. It's programs, PROGRAMMES, programs at
Yeah.
tibethouse.in.
Okay.
Mr. Angitji,
Yeah. So I've sent you. Yes.
can you please retry again? Like if it's working or not? Can you just check once?
Oh yeah. I think it's working now. Yeah. It's working now. Can you
Okay.
see?
Hi.
Okay. I think the restarting just worked.
All right.
Yeah. That's good.
Okay,
Okay.
so shall I start now?
Sure. I apologize everybody for the delay. And yes, Tanzana, please.
Can you please stop sharing the screen share? Okay. So a very good evening and a warm touch to all the participants here. Uh, so may I first request everyone to kindly put your videos on and microphone on mute during the whole session. Thank you. So while I'm Tenzin Legman, Assistant Program Coordinator of Tibet House, New Delhi, and I welcome you all to our 11th session of today's virtual program, which is on Introduction to Buddhism. And today we are very glad and honored to have among us Mr. Angit Goenla, who will be speaking on Bodhicaryavatara, Series 1, Chapter 5 on Vigilance. But before we proceed, I would like to introduce today's speaker. So Mr. Angit Goel is a student of Buddhism and has attended various teachings given at Tibet House, New Delhi, including the recently completed Nalanda Master's course. So with a background in IT, he currently works in the area of finance. So I now request Mr. Angitji to kindly proceed the session. Thank you.
Apologies for. Okay. Hello, am I audible?
Yeah.
Audible? Okay. So a very warm welcome to everybody, and my sincere apologies for causing the delay of 10 minutes. And so I'll try to make up for it. And though my background says IT, and despite that, I got a little hiccups here. So, anyways, let me start by sharing the screen first. So as you all know, today's topic is discussion on chapter 5 of Bodhisattva Charyavatara, or guarding alertness. And there are different translations of the title. In some texts, you may also find it translated as the title as a vigilant introspection. So introspection, vigilance, alertness, we'll be discussing what it actually means. So these are just different words which connote the specific meaning in this context. And this text has already been my very good friends and colleagues and Dharma friends have discussed quite in length about what overall this text presents and covered many aspects. I'm sure it's not like one chapter presents something standalone, but rather one theme underlies almost can overlap all the chapters. So that is the another thing. So you would all be familiar with the biography of Bodhisattva Shantideva by now. So this is a text by Bodhisattva Shantideva, Bodhisattva Charyavatara. But nonetheless, I will just, in order to recap, or you can say just to form a little background, I'll just go through a little details. So in brief, what does this Bodhisattva Charyavatara as the title it conveys? And what is the intention of the great master Bodhisattva Shantideva behind composing, or as you all well know, it was a teaching given in the Nalanda monastery behind these verses that he spoke. So it, as you can see, the title can be broken down into three, you can say, different words which conveys the three different meanings. One is the Bodhisattva. Bodhisattva, as you all know, is somebody, a being, a spiritual aspirant, in particular of the Mahayana, with Mahayana aspiration, is a being who wishes to attain Buddhahood, which is the highest enlightened state possible, following the Buddha's teachings, uh, with sole aim of benefiting all other beings. So with that motivation, so one has formed that motivation, but what next? How does one proceed along the path? So that comes under the aspect of the charya, or conduct, or activities, and one can get an idea of the activities through reading or listening to the teachings, and through many other ways, as we are doing here. And so this text, the third part of the title, Avatara, or which connotes has a connotation of entrance. So in summary, as you all know, that this text gives a very good summary of somebody who is intending to following a bodhisattva path, or is following a bodhisattva path. What should they be doing? Now, before I further delve into this chapter, just to get an overview. As I said, bodhisattva is a being who wants to attain Buddhahood or become a Buddha for benefiting all beings. But we may ask, why Buddhahood? Why not something else? What is so special about Buddhahood? So, as many of you may know, that the word Buddh, the root Buddh in the Buddhahood, has a connotation of awakened one. Awakened from what? Awakened from the, in this particular context, awakened from the sleep of ignorance and its subtle stains, or in some sense, what it means, that somebody who is not a Buddha has something called ignorance, which kind of prevents or limits us from experiencing our complete potential, and keeps us in samsara, or in other words, continuous suffering, cycle of suffering. And so what happens when somebody becomes a Buddha? What does Buddhahood connotes? So there are innumerable, infinite set of qualities which highlight many different aspects of Buddhahood, but all of them can be summarized under these three qualities, which I have shown here: perfect love, perfect wisdom, and perfect potential or power. What perfect love here says is that somebody who is a Buddha has a complete impartial affection towards all the beings, without any biases. What perfect wisdom connotes is a Buddha has a knowledge how to most effectively and most efficiently to guide the beings in order to realize their own potential, just as he has done himself or herself. And just knowing, having these two things, perfect love, that is, you have so much affection that you want to help beings, and with perfect wisdom, you actually know how to do that in the most effective manner. But perfect power is what actually enables one to further proceed on the path and utilize these to help those beings. Now, just to put the teachings of Bodhisattva Charyavatara in certain context is, now Lord Buddha, once he became enlightened, until he attained Mahaparinirvana, he gave a lot of teachings. He wandered around the length and breadth of the country, and He gave a lot of teachings, mainly depending on the audience that was there. And later on, these teachings were compiled by his most advanced students into sutras, and later commentaries were written on them. But for most of us, people who are working in the modern day, today's time, it is rarely possible for us to be able to study thoroughly all of those texts. And so even at that time, when almost 2000 years ago, when Bodhisattva Shantideva was giving these teachings, he was aware of these things, even at that time, and of course, for the future times. So one thing that he himself mentions, he composed this treatise so that in order to extract the essence of all the Buddha's teachings pertaining to Mahayana path. And so this text presents the Bodhisattva trainings in a manner which are complete and error-free, and in the form of practical instructions that once anybody goes through and get an idea about, they can actually utilize them and put them into practice without too much of a problem. And further, it brings together the essence of all the Buddha's teachings. It does not leave out anything. So for somebody can really utilize that. And besides Bodhisattva Charyavatara, Bodhisattva Shantidev also composed two other well-known longer length texts. One is known as Sutra Samuchaya, or Compendium of Sutras, which is a middling length, which is longer than Bodhisattva Charyavatara, but lesser than his other text, Shiksha Samuchaya, Compendium of Discipline, which is the most extensive in length. So in this chapter also, Bodhisattva Shantidev towards the end mentions about these two texts and refers the readers who want to get more details to refer to these two texts. So just to quickly give an overview. So this text, Bodhisattva Charyavatara, presents from the point of developing our aspiration and motivation. It presents how the emphasizes or details how we can generate bodhicitta. And once having generated that, how we proceed on the path from the point of view of spiritual training. There is extensive discourse given on the six perfections, as you already know. And I wanted to give that the whole text can be viewed from many different aspects, how the teachings are given. So one straightforward way is that it gives in detail almost chapter by chapter on six perfections. Another way according to which it can be looked at is from the perspective of bodhicitta. Like first three chapters, they emphasize on how to generate bodhicitta. And then next three chapters, even though they present from the view of six perfections, but the theme behind is how to prevent bodhicitta that has been generated from weakening further. Then chapters 7 to 9 on intensifying the bodhicitta that has already been generated. And finally, we have the dedication chapter. So here I just wanted to just give me one moment, please. Yeah, here I just wanted to present an overview of this whole chapter because it is quite a long chapter, almost containing 107 verses, and I'm afraid for me, first of all, for me to comprehend and understand all these is almost impossible in such a short time and whatever study I have done. So I will try to go through as many of these as possible and trying to focus on each of the key verses from the groups because there are groups of verses so the first few verses, actually verses 1 to 22, talk about the need to guard our minds. Here, the guarding our minds in the sense of at every time being aware of whatever action we are doing through our body, speech, or mind. Ultimately, they are motivated somewhere. The initial intent comes from our mind. So if we want to avoid the negative actions, and on the other hand, we want to do virtuous actions, until and unless we are under control of our own minds, we are vigilant that how we are acting and not just falling under our habitual patterns. It is important to guard our minds. If we don't do so, we'll, under the influence of our own negative defilements, we will continue to engage in negative actions and we will continue to suffer. So the first part of this chapter emphasizes that why it is important to guard our minds. And the next few verses, 23 to 33, they talk about, okay, once we know that it is very really important that we should be guarding our minds, how to do that, how to go about doing that, what is it that can really help us in guarding our minds. So here the two most important tools that are those of mindfulness and introspection. They are discovered, I'm sorry, they are described at length here, and we will also try to understand what they actually mean. It's quite straightforward. And so it gives some drawbacks and benefits of what if we don't follow these, and likewise, what if we follow them. Now, so two things we have covered, that we need to guard our minds, and we need the most important and key things to do that are mindfulness and introspection. Now, knowing this, how do we actually utilize these two, mindfulness and introspection, to guide our actions? What kind of things we should not be doing, what kind of things we should be doing by utilizing these two? That follows, that forms the major part of this chapter. The third one, mind training by means of mindfulness and vigilant introspection. And then towards the end, there are few concluding verses, 97 to 107. So, okay, now I'll be sharing the verses themselves in the PDF form. And yeah, other thing is, if I'm going too fast or inaudible or anything, please let me know, first thing. And other thing is, if anybody has any questions at any point of time, please feel free to ask. And towards the end, I hope we should have some time. Or what I can do is I can stop 10 to 5 minutes before. If you have questions, we'll take that. Otherwise, if there are verses remaining, I'll continue with those. So this is a PDF of Bodhisattva Charyavatara that I've downloaded from internet. I don't know if it is ethical to do this, but for the purpose of this thing, I could not find anything uh, more suitable for my immediate needs. So I'm just saying that I'm using this PDF for a purpose of discussion. And yes, this is what this is a sharing and discussion session of, as I said. So whatever things I'm saying is something what I've learned with hearing to so many different teachers, and it's kind of assimilation of that. And of course, it's mixed with whatever my own defilements I have. So please take it with a pinch of salt, and not something which it may not be entirely accurate, but I'll try to best of my knowledge. So yeah. So as I said, the first few verses, they discuss the need to guard our minds. The first verse, as it says, those who wish to guard their practice should very attentively guard their minds. For those who do not guard their minds will be unable to guard their practice. So how to guard our minds? As I said, for this, we need to be mindful of our behavior. For this, we really need to know that what are the activities or negative behaviors that we should avoid, and what kind of behaviors we should adopt, physical, verbal, as well as mental. And how does this come about? How do we know these things? It is only through study, reflection, and eventually the meditation over what we have learned and reflected upon. And furthermore, just knowing the teachings, practices is not sufficient, as it is, we know that we need to put them into practice. We need to apply them. And for their application, this is where these tools of mindfulness and introspection, they play an indispensable role. And so just to what I'm using these two words, mindfulness and introspection, quite repeatedly. So what does mindfulness mean? It basically means that, in very simple terms, not forgetting the instructions, not forgetting the practices, not forgetting that what is it that we should not be doing and what we should be doing. These two things, remembering those, that is the essence of mindfulness. And then introspection, what does introspection entail? It means having a kind of constant inner watchfulness over our own minds, over our own behavior, and checking almost constantly that whether we are behaving in accordance with the teachings and practicing that we intend to do, we intend to practice. So this is the whole kind of the essence of this chapter, as I said. Then the verses 2 to 8, they discuss what is it, what happens if we are not careful in guarding our minds, what drawbacks and fallacies will occur. So as verse 2 says, in this world, unsubdued and crazed elephants are incapable of causing such harms as the miseries of the deepest hell, which can be caused by the unleashed elephant of my mind. So it is quite self-explanatory. Basically, what it's saying, it is saying that until and unless we really take care of our behavior, our negative emotions, and the negative actions that it leads to ultimately, while a crazed elephant can only cause us harm in this life, if we don't control our negative actions and continue to engage in them, they can cause us sorrow far beyond this life and in future lives to come. So it is much more dangerous, worse than a wild elephant who can even kill us in this life. But that harms just remains in this life, unlike our negative actions. Now, verse 3 says that, but if the elephant of my mind is firmly bound on all sides by the rope of mindfulness, all fears will cease to exist and all virtues will come into my hand. So, again, it basically summarizes what I have said already, that with mindfulness and introspection at our disposal and really knowing how to act, we can really control and our suffering and future happiness. Then verses 4 and 5 continue in the same spirit, and I'll move on to the verse 6. So the perfect teacher himself has shown that in this way all fears as well as boundless miseries originate from the mind. So just at this point, one thing I would like to mention, that what the what is presented in these texts, in this text, Bodhisattva Charyavatara, or the other texts written by Bodhisattva Shantideva, they all the source of all these teachings are the Buddha's teachings itself. It's not something new which Bodhisattva Shantideva is saying here. And so one very good benefit of that is knowing that by studying this text indirectly, we are kind of getting an essence of all the Buddha's teachings and not something different. So both the things are there. And I would just like to quote two verses from the sutras to show where Lord Buddha has mentioned about how our mind is. How sorry. So, for instance, in one of the sutras, Sadharma Pundarika Sutra, Lord Buddha says, the mind is our enemy, our mighty foe. No enemy exists apart from this, our mind. Like tinder burned by flames itself has kindled, the mind is scorched and burned by mind itself. So what this is saying that unless we gain a control of our minds, we are our own source of suffering and misery, and nobody else has. And then likewise in Dhammapada, which is a compilation of the teachings, Buddha's teachings, it says, mind is the chief and precedes them all. If with impure mind one acts or speaks, miseries follow like cart following an ox. And in this line, mind is the chief and precedes them all. If with pure mind one acts or speaks, happiness follows like a shadow that never leaves. So I just wanted to share these two quotations, and there are many more by uh, by Acharya Vasubandhu and Abhidharma Ghosha and Acharya Kirti and Madhyamika Avtara. So I didn't want to share too many for the sake of time. And coming back to the PDF. So likewise, the verses 7 and 8 go into further details that how every suffering, everything that we can imagine or mention in the sutras about hell realms and all the different kind of sufferings that we have, the ultimate source is in our own mind, in the sense that they come about by our own negative actions of body and speech, and ultimately they are driven by our own negative emotions which come from the mind. So till verse 8, it is talking about how all sufferings come from the mind. Then likewise, in verses 9 to 17, Bodhisattva Shantideva is saying that all the virtues likewise, even though seemingly they might be just physical virtues, they are also entirely dependent on our mental state, our thought process, and our mind. So for what Bodhisattva Shantideva has done for as a reference is also describing in these verses what 6 perfections are in summary. So like as verse 9 says, if the perfection of if the perfection of sorry, if the perfection of generosity were the elevation of the world's
our sound doesn't go there.
If the perfection of generosity were the alleviation of the world's poverty, then since beings are still starving now, in what manner did the previous Buddhas perfect it? So, in a way, in verse 9, Bodhisattva Shantideva is kind of rhetorically asking a question that Buddhas have supposed to perfected all the 6 perfections. And if Buddha has supposedly perfected the perfection of generosity, but there still we see poverty around, people who are destitute around, then in what manner we can say that Buddhas have actually perfected the perfection of generosity? And then verse 10 continues in this vein. The perfection of generosity is said to be the thought to give all beings everything, together with the fruit such a thought. Hence, it is simply a state of mind. So Bodhisattva Shantideva is telling us that what perfection of generosity, it does not depend on what objects are given or how many beings are relieved from poverty actually, but rather it is the attitude of the person who is developing that perfection. And it is depending on the state of the mind that if that attitude is completely unhindered or a kind of blocked by any kind of attachment to one's possessions or virtues, then one is supposed to have kind of perfected that generosity. So the main idea behind is what Bodhisattva Shantideva is trying to tell us, that again this virtue, it is dependent on our mind, the state of our mind, what we call perfection of generosity. Likewise, in verse 11, Bodhisattva Shantideva talks about ethical discipline. So I won't go into it's quite self-explanatory. And likewise, verse 12 talks about perfection of patience. Yeah, yeah. Verse 12, 13, 14 are about perfection of patience. And then verse 15 is about enthusiasm or joyous effort. So I'll talk a little bit about verse 15. And in between, if you find that there is some verse that I'm not covering and you want that we can discuss that, I'll try to the best of my ability. But it is, or depending if you have time later, we can come back to the verses that I may not have discussed explicitly. So verse 15 says, although the development of merely a clear state of concentration can result in taking birth in Brahma's realm, physical and vocal actions cannot so result when accompanied by weak mental conduct. It is slightly tricky in the sense, how is it talking about the joyous effort or enthusiasm? And I would speak my understanding of it. So what in the first two lines, what Bodhisattva Shantideva is saying that somebody who practices samadhi or shamatha diligently, they can achieve a higher state of rebirth in the God's realm, such as Brahma's realm. And having that person may have no idea about bodhicitta, wisdom of emptiness, and strictly as per they would still be in samsara, not freed from samsara. They would have merely achieved a higher state. Now, in the next two lines, Bodhisattva Shantideva is saying that even such a state of higher rebirth in the God's realm, somebody who has no control over his mind, over his action, such a person cannot achieve even such a state. So, physical and verbal actions cannot so result when accompanied by a weak mental conduct. So, just by doing some good physical actions or good verbal actions, but if our minds are not controlled so that we really refrain from mental negativities and engage in virtues and let our minds do easily fall under prey of their habitual tendencies, we cannot even practice a thing as shamatha and achieve the higher states. So he says by weak mental conduct, that inability of kind of finding joy in practicing virtue and refraining from negativities. And then verse 16 speaks about the next perfection, perfection of concentration. I will not go into that. And verse 17, I'll talk about. It is talking about perfection of wisdom, referring to perfection of wisdom, rather, I should say, not going into detail. So even those who wish to find happiness and overcome misery will wander with no aim nor meaning if they do not comprehend the secret of the mind, the paramount significance of dharma. So ultimately, the root cause of our suffering, as would have been elaborated upon and discussed in previous sessions, is ignorance. In particular, how we things view as so solidly, inherently, or independently existing. And until and unless we eradicate that ignorance from the root, we will not be able to find the everlasting peace and happiness, freedom from miseries, and attainment of happiness. And what Bodhisattva Shantideva is saying, that to really eradicate the ignorance, the subtlest ignorance from the root, we have to comprehend the secret of the mind. In the line 3, what secret of the mind here connotes is knowing the true nature of our own minds, which is the emptiness of the mind itself. And to get to that level, first of all, until and unless we even subdue the grosser levels of the defilements, mental defilements, there is no way we can access the subtler levels of mind. And even that is not the final aim. But we need to first of all access the subtler levels of mind by controlling our grosser defilements, and then utilize that to see its own true nature or the secret of mind. So again, the emphasis here, what Bodhisattva Shantideva is implying is, again, the virtues also depend entirely on our own minds, and therefore he's emphasizing the need for vigilant guarding alertness or vigilant introspection and mindfulness. So this is kind of summarized in the verse 18. This being so, I shall hold and guard my mind well. Without the discipline of guarding the mind, what use are many other disciplines? And verse 19, just as I would be attentive and careful, sorry, just as I would be attentive and careful of a wound when amidst a bustling, uncontrolled crowd, so I should always guard the wound of my mind when dwelling among harmful people. So it is quite self-explanatory. What Bodhisattva Shantideva here is saying that if we get a simple physical wound, for example, some fracture or something, then we are ourselves are very careful that we do not get hurt, or it does not get worse when we are amongst many people around. We try to protect ourselves of any further physical injury if we have something that is badly hurt. Bodhisattva Shantideva is saying that likewise we need to guard our minds. Wound of my mind here connoting that our minds are fragile in the sense they are easily led led into negative tendencies due to our habituations. So in that sense, they are easily wounded. Therefore, we need to guard them when dwelling among harmful people. Harmful here, not that the people themselves are harmful, or harmful in the sense that there are situations around where our anger can be easily aroused or our desires can be easily aroused. So in that sense, the people are said to be harmful here. And then verse 20 says, and if I am careful of a wound through fear of it being slightly hurt, then why do I not guard the wound of my mind through fear of being crushed by the mountains of hell? So I'll continue. Should I behave in such a way as this, then whether among harmful people or even in the midst of women, this steady effort to control myself will not decline. So this is again the similar thing. The first two lines are talking about where situations where anger can arise in me. And if I'm careful and really guarding my mind, one can prevent oneself for easily giving into the anger or related emotions. And likewise, in the midst of women is basically talking about these situations where desire can be easily aroused. And since these teachings were given in the monastic context, so the women are mentioned here. Otherwise, one can simply say in the midst of objects where desire can be aroused. So if one is mindful, the steady effort to control myself will not decline with the aid of mindfulness and introspection. Then Bodhisattva Shantideva is saying that it is better to be without wealth, honor, body, and livelihood, and it is better to let other virtues deteriorate rather than ever to let the virtues of the mind decline. So basically, again, emphasizing it does not mean that one should let other virtues deteriorate or they are not of importance. But it is saying that if mind is not taken care of, everything else will automatically deteriorate. So one should be careful or mindful of that. So kind of summarizing few previous verses in the verse 23, Bodhisattva Shantideva is saying, so therefore, O you who wish to guard your minds, I beseech you with folded hands, always exert yourselves to guard mindfulness and alertness. Alertness or introspection, we can also use the word introspection here, or vigilance. And the next few verses, 4 or 5 verses, talk about what the drawbacks of not having mindfulness, not having introspection, sorry. So verse 24 says, people who are disturbed by sickness have no strength to do anything useful. Likewise, those whose minds are disturbed by confusion have no strength to do anything wholesome. So here, basically disturbed by confusion in lines we connotes, again, having no control over our own minds and not knowing, first of all, not knowing in a given situation how to behave. Or even if we know, we have learned earlier that given a situation, how one should actually act, not really aware of our behavior at that point of time, being vigilant of our behavior. Our mind can easily go into confusion and confusion of negative defiled emotions and easily get into the negative actions. So have no strength to do anything wholesome. Verse 25. Whatever has been learned, contemplated, and meditated upon by those whose minds lack alertness, just like water in a leaking vase, will not be retained in their memory. So I'll just, so these verses are discussing what are the drawbacks of not having this vigilance over our own minds. But the first line of this verse 25, I would just like to spend some time on it, a little bit more. Whatever has been learned, contemplated, and meditated upon. So here Bodhisattva Shantideva is alluding to the three kinds of wisdom, which I'm sure many of you would have come across often, described by many of our precious teachers. So it is basically talking about wisdom derived through learning, wisdom derived through contemplation or reflection, and wisdom derived through meditation. So first of all, anybody who wants to, who is on the path, we need to get information, or we need to know what is it that we have to practice. And this is what wisdom derived through learning. It is kind of a borrowed knowledge that one acquires through, say, listening to teachings, attending to teachings from a teacher, or maybe reading through books, or something online these days. So that is kind of a borrowed knowledge. It is the new information that we have got. We really don't know whether it is really correct, incorrect. We don't have any kind of conviction in that. Now, so the next step is, having gained that knowledge, one one continues to analyze that, reflects upon it, and through, say, reasoning and analysis, and maybe a little bit of experience. And when one gains conviction in it, that okay, this really makes sense, and I really believe in it. So then that wisdom is wisdom derived through contemplation or reflection. In a way, the knowledge that you borrowed, kind of in the wisdom derived through learning, that becomes, in a way, in some sense, your own knowledge. But still, it is, these two are more or less at the intellectual level. Then with repeated reflection and contemplation, further, kind of, one gains more experiential understanding and arrives at the wisdom derived through meditation. So this is what Bodhisattva Shantideva is alluding to, these in the first line of verse 25. And what Bodhisattva Shantideva is telling in this verse is, even somebody has these three wisdoms, but if somebody is lacking vigilance, alertness, and is not careful in guarding their minds, then even these three can deteriorate, can decline. Just like water in a leaking vase will not be retained in the memory. So he's giving, saying that it is really important, this mindfulness and vigilance for us. And likewise in verse 26, even those who have much learning, faith, and willing perseverance will become defiled by a moral fall due to the mistakes of lacking alertness. The thieves of unalertness, in falling upon the decline of mindfulness, will steal even the merits I have firmly gathered, so that I shall then proceed to lower realms. Now, next few verses, verses 29, verse 28. This host of thieves, who are my own disturbing conceptions, will search for a good opportunity, and having found it, they will steal my virtue and destroy the attainment of life in a happy realm. So again, till here, and preceding few verses, Bodhisattva Shantideva is telling us what all drawbacks will occur if we are not mindful and vigilant. And then in following verses, following 4 or 5 verses, Bodhisattva Shantideva is talking. Now, how do we practice mindfulness and introspection? How do we go about practicing these two things? So verse 29 says, therefore, I shall never let mindfulness depart from the doorway of my mind. If it goes, I should recall the misery of the lower realms and firmly reestablish it there. So here is saying that now we know what mindfulness is, and we also know that it is important, that we need to wait. But sometimes we may become lax. We may think, okay, I'll practice it. I know I need to do it. I'll do it tomorrow. Or what is the need to be so much mindful? I can sometimes, it's fine. I may not need to be mindful all the time. It's okay. But in line 3 and 4, Bodhisattva Shantideva is saying that when such an attitude even remotely arises in us and we tend to become lax, knowingly or unknowingly, I should recall the misery of the lower realms and firmly reestablish it there. So in a kind of, it's how can we motivate ourselves? In this context of mindfulness, being mindful, but in general, how if we become lax in our spiritual practice or otherwise. So this is something, one of the ways in which one can do that by reflecting upon the sufferings of samsara in general. And then verse 30 says, other ways in which one can, not one can, one should, or this is the best way in a sense, verse 30, through staying in the company of spiritual masters, through the instructions of abbots, and through fear, mindfulness will easily be generated in fortunate people who practice with respect. So again, it is quite self-explanatory. Of course, staying in the company of spiritual masters in this day and age as best we can, if not continuous. But with through social media and other things, we can really see and kind of get an idea of how a spiritual master we are following are they actually, how do they behave in public, how do they behave with their disciples and other things. Using these as examples also can give us some motivation and practical living instruction in a way that how should we behave and how can we be mindful, and through the instructions of abbots and through fear. So fear here does not mean fearing some punishment. Rather, it is in some sense fear of shame, that if we are following that, if we are not mindful and if we behave in an unruly manner, not following mindfulness in introspection, we may bring about shame and kind of unhappiness to our teachers, our masters. So it is fear of shame in that sense. And so lines 3 and 4 say, mindfulness will easily be generated in fortunate people who practice with respect. Yeah. And furthermore, we should, verse 31 says, another way in which we can motivate ourselves and think that, okay, I need to be careful, really, really careful about my behavior, is having this awareness that I am ever dwelling in the presence of all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas who are always endowed with unobstructed vision. So having this thought in our minds that Buddhas and high-level Bodhisattvas, they have a direct and immediate, they know what we are thinking, even though we may think we are alone and nobody's watching us. But no, we know that if we have this thing thought in our mind that Buddhas are aware of my mind right now, and therefore I should be mindful, that will be another way for us to bring mindfulness and vigilance to our behavior. Likewise, verse 32 says, by thinking in this way, I shall mindfully develop sense of shame, respect, and fear. Also, through doing this, recollection of the Buddha will repeatedly occur. When mindful, verse 33, when mindfulness is set with the purpose of guarding the doorway of the mind, then alertness will come about, and even that which had gone will return. So it is saying that if we are constantly mindfulness, the vigilance or introspection will automatically, it will also be enhanced. They are kind of, one can say, mutually reinforce each other. Now, having known that how we can be mindful and why we need to be it, how do we act using these two tools at our disposal of mindfulness and introspection? So next few verses talk about using being mindful and vigilant in terms of refraining from negative actions. So around next 10 or 11 verses are about that, about the negative actions that one should not be doing. So for instance, verse 34 says, When just as I'm about to act, I see that my mind is tainted with defilement. At such a time, I should remain unmovable like a piece of wood. So these are simple to understand next few verses, and they're talking about uh, very simple things, but yet the idea here, I'm sure many of you would know that, but just for my own understanding also, is that it's not that these actions in themselves are bad or something, at least visibly bad or something, but the idea is that by doing these things, we will develop more mindfulness and introspection. They are very easy way to cultivate mindfulness and vigilance. And if we can practice this in simpler situations, then when more intense situations arise, we will be able to get more easier control over our minds. So verse 35, I'm skipping till verse 40. One can go through them. They are not very difficult. And verse 41 is about very brief kind of succinct summary of some how one can practice samadhi concentration. That so I thought I would just speak about it. Those who strive by all means for concentration should not wander off even a moment by thinking, how is my mind behaving? They should closely analyze their mind. So this is a very brief summary of how to practice shamatha. And so say we are practicing calm abiding meditation or single pointed meditation. So we can have any object that we can, any virtuous object of focus on which we can decide that we want to single pointedly focus. So taking example of our breathing as an object, uh, breathing in and out, and we are just focusing on our breath. So then it says, as we are focusing on it, we should try not to wander off even for a moment. And by thinking, how is my mind behaving? This is basically what introspection is. That while we are practicing doing that calm abiding meditation, focusing on our breath, we also need to constantly check whether actually we are still on our object of meditation or not. And if we are not, then we have to gently bring it back on our object of meditation. That in this case, which is breath. And coming back to our object of meditation is done through mindfulness, which remembers, okay, the object from which I have wandered off is actually the breath, which I'm supposed to focus on. So just reading it again. Those who strive by all means for concentration should not wander off even a moment. By thinking, how is my mind behaving? They should closely analyze their mind. Then next verse says, so of course I have tried to explain this verse in the context of a formal, maybe a meditation session, shamatha. But one, it is not necessary that this means just refers here just to the sitting, formal sitting concentration, but rather in our day-to-day lives, we may decide that, okay, I'll be more focused at some point of time. So the next verse is saying, but if I'm unable to do this, that is maintain focus in certain exceptional circumstances, or where in some situations where I may be allowed to lax my concentration. If I'm unable to do this, that is maintain my concentration. When afraid or involved in celebrations, then I should relax. Likewise, it has been taught that at times of giving, one may be indifferent to certain aspects of moral discipline. For example, there might be some medical emergency or some other thing, then of course one has to attend to that. And the celebrations here, again, these teachings are given in the context of a monastic setting. Celebrations here can be, for example, giving offerings to sangha members, or in that kind of virtuous activities, not the usual celebrations. And so yeah, so basically it is saying that in certain situations one can relax one's concentration also. Then verse 43 says, I should undertake whatever deed I have intended to do and think of And I think a not is missing here, and not think of doing other than it. With my mind applied to that task, I should set about for the time being to accomplish it. Basically, what it is saying in simple words is, first, rather than kind of without finishing one task and jumping onto another, it is better we finish one task properly and then start the another one. And why is this so? So in the next verse, it continues. By acting in this way, all will be done well, but by acting otherwise, neither action will be done. Neither action will be done in the sense, if we don't finish one task properly and get started with other things, so neither the previous thing that we wanted to will be done properly, nor the later things. Then the line 3 of verse 44. Likewise, there will be no increase in the proximate disturbing conceptions that come from a lack of alertness. So it is saying that if we act in this way, our mindfulness and vigilance will automatically increase, and they will enable us to guard our minds against the negative emotions. Now, verses 45 onwards, next, I should say 13 or 14 verses present how, so if we have taken any precepts or we are following precepts here in the context of say monastic, but in general, how to guard our behavior, and so that we do not we do not break our the precepts that one has taken. So for instance, verse 45 says, if I happen to be present while a senseless conversation is taking place, or if I happen to see some kind of spectacular show, I should abandon attachment towards it. So the essence here is basically not to let our desire or uncontrolled attachment arise when we see some activity going on and we really get pulled towards it. Basically, we should not get uncontrollably pulled towards things, especially which are non-virtuous. And then verses 46 to 53 give this kind of practical advice and things which should not be done. For example, verse 46, if for no reason I start digging the earth, picking at the grass or drawing patterns on the ground, then by recalling the advice of the Buddhas, I should immediately, I think it should be stop out of fear. Excuse me. So again, what these actions or why, obviously some would be straight away non-virtuous and negative, and but some might seem that one may not, even for myself, one may not immediately see that what is wrong with these. But again, the idea here is more than the action. We tend to do certain things out of habit without even realizing what we are doing. So if we actually decide that we will be refraining from some such actions, that will enable us to enhance our mindfulness and vigilance when if we happen to get start doing such things without realizing. So the whole idea here behind these verses, indirectly, of course, it is giving us very practical advice, how to behave, what to do, what not to do. For example, in verse 49, whenever I have distracted thoughts, the wish to verbally belittle others, and so on. So it is giving a practical advice, but indirectly it is also the aspect of mind training in sense of improving our mindfulness and vigilance. So I will not go through till verse 53. Verse 54. Having in this way examined his mind for disturbing conceptions, his or her mind for disturbing conceptions, and for thoughts that strive for meaningless things, the courageous bodhisattva should hold his mind steady through the application of remedial forces. Being very resolute and faithful, steady, respectful, polite, with a sense of shame, apprehensive, and peaceful, I should strive to make others happy. So this kind of summarizing the previous verses, that this is what a bodhisattva should be doing, and with the primary aim of making others happy. One thing is, of course, to for oneself not to engage in negativities, for prevention of one's own suffering and attainment of one's own happiness. But the main aim of bodhisattvas is to work for the happiness of others. So verse 56 says, I should not be disheartened by the whims of the childish who are in discord with one another. I should know them to arise in their minds due to disturbing conceptions and therefore be kind towards them. So it is quite, again, self-explanatory. In doing that, which by nature is not unwholesome, both for the sake of myself and other sentient beings, I should always hold my mind fast, acting like an apparition with no sense of self. So again, this is kind of summarizing the previous few verses that in summary, that the main thing is I should always hold my mind fast in the sense of be mindful all the time in whatever I'm doing for the sake of myself or for the sake of all beings. And line 4 says, acting like an apparition with no sense of self. Obviously, this, as you would all know, this has a very deep meaning, but just at a very cursory level. So an apparition has a connotation of existing in some way and appearing in another way. For example, if some child sees a magical show or illusion, the appearing thing might appear very real to that child, while it does not exist in that way. It may, and likewise, Bodhisattva Shantideva is saying that the sense, the Bodhisattvas should act with no sense of self, in the sense our self also in us is like an apparition or an illusion. In the sense, though it appears to exist to all of us as very solid and independently on its own, but it does not exist that way. It exists by dependence on various factors, and in that sense it is like compared here to like an apparition or illusion. So while keeping my mind knowing what precepts I have to follow and what not to follow for the benefit of myself and others, all the actions that I engage in, also underlying this, I should have this thought that all these things are like an apparition or illusion like. And in this way, verse 58 says, by thinking again and again that after a long time I have won the greatest leisure, likewise I should hold my mind as utterly unshakable as the king of mountains. This is so here Bodhisattva Shantideva is alluding to the leisure and opportunity of the preciousness that we really all have in this life. He's saying that we should also repeatedly, continuously reflect on this, that we have the leisure in the sense we are free to practice what we want to do. We don't have any serious impediments to what we are if we want to pursue a path. And if we can see around in the world, there are various places where this is not the case. People either are restricted or they may not have the luxury of spending time in pursuing such pursuits. And moreover, another very important aspect is not only we have this freedom, but also we have the opportunity or we have access to such precious Dharma teachers and teachings. So he's saying that we should also reflect on this and motivate ourselves to enhance our practice and reinvigorate it, kind of. So in verse 59 onwards, almost next 10, 11 verses talk about another aspect is what typically causes us to be really stuck in, or one of the major impediments to our spiritual practice is attachment, our strong attachment to our own bodies. And if we can analyze, think a little bit, there's so much time we spend in taking care of our own bodies in terms of its nourishment, protection from various kind of ailments, and looking good. And furthermore, if anyone says anything slightly negative about our looks or anything, we times can get very easily upset or angry or depressed about it. So here, Bodhisattva Shantideva is kind of trying to exhorting us to reduce that attachment, because it causes an hindrance to our overall practice and consumes a lot of our time unnecessarily. So I'll go through some, but may not go through all the verses on this topic. So verse 59. If mind you are not made unhappy when this body is dragged and tossed about by vultures greedy for flesh, then why are you so concerned about it now? So Bodhisattva Shantideva is saying that once we are dead, our body, we are going to leave it behind. And once it is left behind, wild animals may eat it, or anything can happen to it. And nobody would care, even we ourselves won't care about it. So if then we don't care about it, why are we so engrossed about it now when we are alive? And then verse 60 says, holding this body as mine, why mine do you guard it so? Since you and it are separate, what use can it be to you? So from another angle, Bodhisattva Shantideva is saying that body and mind, they are separate. They are different entities, while our mind comes from our previous lives. So just to say that, yes, there are some underlying things that I'm presuming that, yes, mind as a continuum comes from previous life and goes to next life. And some people may or may not agree or agree with that, or have some doubts. So I'm not. So there is a separate discussion one can have on that. So I won't. I'm just presuming here that mind is a continuum, and it is mind of this life has come from previous life, whereas the bodies of this life have come from parents of this life. So clearly they are two separate things. If you think like that, we can get some conviction in that. So Bodhisattva Shantideva is asking, if these two are separate, then why are we, then mind, why are you so attached to this body? It is a different thing from you. And then verse 61, why confused mind do you not hold on to a clean wooden form? Just what is the point of guarding this putrid dirt-filled machine? And Bodhisattva Shantideva is asking, if mind you just need a place to dwell, then you can also have something clean to dwell in, say as a clean wooden form resembling a body. Why do you want to, why this body, this body? And we may still have the thought, no, at the core, this body is clean and pure. It's not impure as suggested. So then Bodhisattva Shantideva is saying, if you still are not convinced, then using your sharp mental discrimination, faculty of discrimination, you should really go and analyze and see whether it is the case. So verse 62 is like going in that direction. First of all, mentally separate the layers of skin from flesh, and then with the scalpel of discrimination, separate the flesh from skeletal frame. So verses 62, 63 are in this way they are analyzing the body. So they are quite self-explanatory. Only thing is we need to reflect on this really to get the reality of ourselves or our bodies. And then verse 64 says, if even when searching with such effort as suggested in the previous verses, you can apprehend no essence, then why with so much attachment are you still guarding this body now? So the mind can say that I still need this body because it is useful to me. So Bodhisattva Shantideva is, so of course it is useful to us if you put it to virtue, but in general, as an ordinary person who is just living their life and say we die without as ordinary people lead lives. So in that sense, if we really think about it, in verse 65, what use this body is to you? So it is saying that if it's like dirty insides are unfit for you to eat, its blood is not fit to drink, and if its intestines are not fit to be sucked. So Bodhisattva Shantideva is presenting really a kind of stark and contrast, and trying to wake us up from our attachment. It's not that he's really saying that your body is something really bad and you should get rid of it, but trying to wake us up from our intense innate attachment to our bodies. And in that sense, we should be try to read these verses. Then verse 66 says, at second best, it is only fit to be guarded in order to feed the vultures and jackals. So Bodhisattva Shanti is at the very best, if what you can do is it can be beneficial for wild animals as food, and nothing beyond that. But then, of course, Bodhisattva Shantideva says in line 3 onwards of verse 66, that on the other hand, this body, this particular human form, truly this body of a human being should only be employed in the practice of virtue. That if it is employed for the practice in the virtue to really pursue not just for the aims of this life, but for the long-term aims for ourselves and others, long-term happiness and freedom from suffering, then this truly is the most precious thing that one can have. And in fact, human form is said to be the best form in all the existences for the practice of dharma. So in that way, Bodhisattva Shanti Deva is saying that if we employ it for that, then it is fine. But verse 67, but should you instead guard it with attachment, then what will you be able to do when it is stolen by the unsympathetic lord of death and given to dogs and birds? So continuing in the same vein, it is talking about our body. We should not be too attached to it. And then verse 70 says, I should conceive of my body as a boat, a mere support for coming and going, and in order to benefit others, transform it into a wish-fulfilling body. So once we have really seen that the way we are overly attached to our bodies, that is quite illogical, and it does not lead to any beneficial results either in this life or future lives. On the other hand, it is a perfect vehicle as a boat. If we consider it as a boat, as a support, it can really take us to the other shore of enlightenment. And just as one can take care of a boat, one will not overly take care of the boat, and one will not neglect it. Likewise, one should be taking care of one's body while not overly indulging it, and also not going to the extreme of completely neglecting it, and then utilize it for practicing, utilizing it for our higher aims. And then it can become truly like a wish fulfilling gem. Then verses 71 to 83, they now this part, up till this part, this thing is over. That the attachment to our body, how we need to reduce that, and furthermore, how we can make our body actually meaningful by practicing dharma. Now verses 71 to verses 83, they talk about how we should actually act, how should we actually behave in general when we are out there in the world. For instance, verse 71 says, now while there is freedom to act, I should always present a smiling face and cease to frown and look angry. I should be a friend and counsel to the world. So these are quite self-explanatory verses. I won't go through them right now because of shortage of time also, and they are overall not very difficult to comprehend and follow. And I would like to speak a little bit on verse 80. When beholding someone with my eyes, thinking I shall fully awaken through depending upon this being, I should look at him or her with an open heart and love. Sorry, excuse me, just give me a few seconds. I need to switch on my charger. Sorry. Yeah, so what it is saying is that when beholding someone or anyone with my eye, in the sense that when, as a bodhisattva, somebody who is practicing the Mahayana path, whenever we interact with anybody, be it somebody, person can be very prominent or can be very ordinary person. Sorry. Yeah. So verse 80 says, when beholding someone with my eyes, it means then bodhisattva, somebody following the Mahayana path, if they are interacting with anybody, uh, and be it an ordinary person or somebody very prominent, can be somebody near and dear one or a neutral person. Whenever we interact with such a person, always we should have at the back of mind this thought that I shall fully awaken through depending upon this being, that whatever bodhisattva acts or path that I'm pursuing is actually by depending on this other person. Whatever negativities or virtues that I get the opportunity to practice is entirely by dependence upon others. And with this thought, one should always look upon with anyone as a bodhisattva one interacts with, and look at him or her with an open heart and love, just like a mother may look at their own child, only child, with such an affection, having this thought that how that other person is important for my own and eventually others' happiness, as a direct cause or indirect cause. And verse 81, always being motivated by great aspiration or being motivated by remedial forces. If I work in the fields of excellence, benefit, and misery, great virtues will come about. Always, so line 1 is saying always being motivated by great aspiration to attain enlightenment for the benefit of others, also myself, or being motivated by remedial forces. That is, whenever any negative emotion arises, I feel one has to apply the antidotes. So whenever one acts due to that. If I work in the fields of excellence, benefit, and misery. So fields of excellence here refers to the triple gem, Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, and is Dharma friends. And fields of benefit here refers to our parents primarily, and fields of misery here refers to, say, poor beings and sick people, or say tired travelers, etc. So what it's saying is that if our virtuous actions are done in reference or in respect to these three kind of beings, the virtues that will come about, they will be accordingly very high. Great virtues will be accrued, and corresponding as a corollary, correspondingly we can see that if we perform any non-virtues with respect to three great fields, even the negative results will be actually intense correspondingly. So next, I will skip to verse 84. So Tenzila, sorry, just how much time? Because I started 10 minutes late. I just wanted to ask because how much time? 5 minutes, 10 minutes? Can I take or?
Sure.
Okay. So then verse 84 onwards, it is talking about the discipline of working for the welfare of others. And basically, each, when studied properly and of course over many times, one will get a more clearer picture of the flow of the theme, that is underlying themes and different topics that are also connected to one another, flowing one after another. I'm just myself trying to get a hold of it. So based on the previous verses, now it's kind of another subtopic starting here. So when this is well understood, I should always strive for the welfare of others. The fasting, merciful ones have allowed a bodhisattva to do some actions that for others were forbidden. So basically, this is saying that for somebody following Mahayana path or bodhisattva path, since the main motivation or the main target is working for the benefit of others. So Buddha permitted bodhisattvas to, in certain situations, to follow the conduct which, for say the people who are following personal liberation, Shavakas and Pratyeka Buddhas, they were strictly forbidden because uh, Buddhas note that in that case it will be harmful for them if they do such things. Whereas in the case of bodhisattvas, such actions can bring immense benefit not just to themselves but for others also. And just in this context, just to a quick, I'm sure you would have heard this story of in the sutras of that there was a bunch of merchants who were going to a jewel island to collect the jewels. And the captain of the ship was a great bodhisattva, as well as many other the merchants themselves were high-level bodhisattvas. And one of the merchant was obviously not a bodhisattva. He decided to kill all others so that he can keep all the jewels. And then this captain, through his clairvoyance, he could see that. And then he realized that by killing all these, this person will accrue so much negativity that it will be very difficult for him to be liberated and for his future lives. So that captain of the ship, he actually, excuse me, he actually killed that person who was thinking of killing others, and seemingly to some other person who would not really see what was really going in the minds of all these beings, they would see that simply an act of killing or murder. But by that act, that bodhisattva accrued, supposedly accrued so much merit that would have otherwise taken a much longer time. And then he saved that person from accruing great negativity also. So these kind of actions, these such actions are what are being referred to here. That as line 4 says, to do some actions that for others were forbidden. And then verse 85 is again following some advice, giving some advice. I should divide my food amongst those who have fallen to lower rounds, those without protection and practitioners, and eat merely what is sufficient for myself. Except for the 3 robes, I may give away all. So this is quite self-explanatory. I would skip to verse 87. Those who lack the pure intention of compassion should not give their body away. Instead, both in this and future lives, they should give it to the cause of fulfilling the great purpose. So here in many sutras and teachings, one may have heard that bodhisattvas perform the great acts of giving their life and even giving away their limbs, such as hands, legs, flesh, even heads. So here Bodhisattva Shantideva is saying that unless one has reached certain level of realization, at least they say that first bhumi of a bodhisattva, one should refrain from giving these things, because instead of benefiting, one may actually harm. If one gets discouraged due to such an act, it will be really harmful. So one should refrain from engaging in such acts until and unless one is really confident and knows that it will benefit themselves and others. And then verse 88 is basically talking about how to whom dharma should be explained or not explained. So even so dharma should not be explained to those who lack respect. Basically, this is the key essence, that one knows that person is disrespectful through their attire or conduct. One should refrain, one should not explain dharma. And why is it so? Because this will kind of not benefit the other persons if they are disrespectful and not receptive. And efficacy of dharma may also decline because of that. And then verse 89 says, nor to a woman unaccompanied by a man. So basically, this is in the context of monastics, that a monastic should not be giving a teaching or be alone with a female who is unaccompanied by another man. So up till verse 99 are such kind of things, what should be done or not done by Bodhisattva when they're actually giving teachings or benefiting others. And then verses 91 to 96 are listing out some conduct, some kind of conduct, which are mentioned here, that why a bodhisattva should not engage in is though seemingly there is nothing negative in them, but somebody who is unaware, or somebody may generate a negative attitude towards a bodhisattva when they see them doing these actions. For example, in verse 91, when I spit or throw away the stick for cleaning my teeth, I should cover it up with earth. Also, it is shameful to urinate and so forth in water or land used by others. Verse 92, when eating, I should not fill my mouth, eat noisily or with my mouth wide open. I should not sit with my legs outstretched, nor rub my hands together. So bodhisattvas, the main task is to benefit others. And how will they benefit others? It's by giving them teachings, or if somebody gets, so for this, they need to connect with beings. And for this, beings who come into contact, they need to get inspired when they see them by their conduct and their teachings. So if somebody sees with them doing such a conduct, they might actually get discouraged, or even form a kind of negative opinion about them, or the Dharma itself. So in this context, Buddha suggested not to engage in such activities. So this is till verse 96. This topic is discussed here. And then verse 99, no, so I'm sorry, verse 97 onwards is kind of summarizing the whole chapter and talking about some little small points that may not be covered in the previous verses. For instance, in verse 98, it talks about the confession of negativities. 3 times by day and 3 times by night, I should recite the Sutra of the Three Heaps. For by relying upon the Buddhas and the awakening mind, my remaining downfalls will be purified. So this is self-explanatory. Just to, I think, given the time, I would just, okay. So verse 104 onwards, I would like to read. It is some practical advice that we can easily apply. I should read the sutras because it is from them that the practices appear. To begin with, I should look at the Sutra of Akasha Garbha. So this is clearly uh, okay. In addition, I should definitely read the Compendium of All Practices, which is the text Shiksha Samuchaya I mentioned in one of the slides in the beginning. It is the text again written by Bodhisattva Shantideva, the extensive length text. I should definitely read the Compendium of All Practices again and again, because what is to be constantly practiced is very well and extensively shown there. Also, I should sometimes look at the condensed compendium of all sutras, or in Sanskrit, Sutra Samuchaya. This is the middling length text again by Bodhisattva Shantideva. And I should make an effort to study the works by the same 2 titles composed by the exalted Nagarjuna. So Arya Nagarjuna actually composed 2 texts by the same titles among many other teachings. So Bodhisattva Shantideva is advising us to go through them as well. Then verse 107. I should do whatever is not forbidden in those works, and when I see a practice there, I should impeccably put it into action in order to guard the minds of worldly people. So next 2 verses are kind of the overall summary of this whole chapter. Verse 108, the defining characteristic of guarding alertness in brief is only this: to examine again and again the condition of my body and mind. This includes obviously the speech also. And verse 109, therefore I shall put this way of life into actual practice, or what can be achieved by merely talking about it? Will a sick man be benefited merely by reading the medical texts? Yeah, I think that kind of gives an overview of the whole chapter from my side. And so if anybody wants to ask a question or discuss some point that I was not clear about or I skipped, I'll be happy to do so.
Can I ask a question, please, Ankitla?
Yeah, sure. Please, Kavalila.
Oh, thank you so much. It was wonderful to hear this. If I may ask, Ankitla, your engagement with this chapter, can you share some things when you first read it and now some things that you look at differently or any points that you have taken away because you have so many years of, practice and study and reflection? Anything in this chapter that you see differently from when you first came across it to now?
Yeah, I would say definitely. For instance, as if and I'm sure initially I would have read this chapter, many topics would have appeared. First of all, disjointed in a way that it is covered talking about different things in different parts of the chapter, and would not have been able to form a coherent underlying theme. That what is the underlying theme of this? Number one, and like some of the things it talks about that one should not dig the grass and other things, for example. I was not sure or clear in the initial readings that what is the benefit of uh, refraining from such a thing? I mean, why is it a negative action? And similar kind of doubts. But through more and more studying and from my understanding, what I have tried to understand to share in this teaching today, what new I think I have understood is that for all these practices and for all the things that we have learned, we are learning, the actually put into practice, the main thing is, one of the main things is that we should be mindful and, as I said, vigilant. Constantly our behavior, we should be monitoring that. I would say that otherwise, specifically in terms of this chapter, I think I will need to go through it a few more times to really get more meaning out of it. That I know. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Anyone else?
I think there's no question from the participants. So, Mr. Angitji, shall we wind up here?
Okay. Yes. I think so. Yeah.
Okay. So with this, we have come to the end of today's program. And on behalf of Tibet House, I would like to thank our today's speaker, Mr. Angit Goyal, for a very insightful presentation and sharing your valuable knowledge with us. And we are very grateful for the time and effort that you took to share your thoughts and experience with us. So thank you once again. And I also want to thank all the participants for taking out your time from your busy schedule to participate in today's event. So thank you once again. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all. Thank you very much for attending, listening to me. And also, due to some rush, just a moment, due to some rush, I could not thank the Tibet House, all the supporting staff, and as well as all the attendees. So now at the conclusion, I would like to offer my heartfelt thanks to everybody. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.